Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Lunch with a Leader. It is an honor to have you, buddy.
No, it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's been great. I've gotten to know you a little bit on our Monday morning baseball calls, and it's been so fun. I know you love baseball. I know your faith means something to you. Walk me back to why Jesus matters to Kyle Stark. You've had a phenomenal career, but in the engine room of your life, that old faith is churning and chugging. Walk that out a little bit for me.
Yeah, I think so. I fortunate grew up in a God-fearing, God-loving household. My parents are both rocks. Both served in the church, led worship, Sunday school. I've shared with people, my dad's the best example of Jesus Christ I've ever been around. And not just that, but to show, he really has lived out what it means to be a man's man who is a God-fearing man. And I think we probably get examples of either one of those in life, but to see that in one package. So fortunate to grow up in the faith and came to know Christ early at a really young age. And so that relationships, that sense of what's right, quote unquote, right supposed to look like, but then also it being real to me early. It wasn't something that grew up in the church and then came to have a relationship later. Like this was early as a young kid. And so then it's been a journey ever since of realizing what does that really look like. And I would say that throughout that journey, the thing, when you talk about, we joke around about can't serve two masters, seek first the kingdom of God. That's really, the longer I go on this journey, the more that crystallizes that there is not like, well, in certain situations or some of the time or in whatever else. And that's been through some highs. It's been through some lows. That's been through some really good times. It's been through some tough times. But ultimately coming to know, God as a heavenly Father and not just Lord, not just Savior, not just some of those things, coming to know the different sides of him through professional, through personal with my wife and my boys. So that's really been that journey, has been the anchor. My ability to hold fast to that consistently at the beginning and end is what has continued to evolve over time.
What do you do now? So everybody who has that faith journey, we can feed it or starve it. What do you do to feed that faith journey for you that plays out into how you lead? What are some of your disciplines you put in place to help you on that faith journey?
Well, I love how you just said discipline because, I think it's one of those things that we subscribe, I think, to discipline in all other areas of our life, physical, professional, some of those different areas. But it's probably those ones that aren't as obvious. So maybe our marriage relationship discipline. And then I think the faith one is a big one. I've joked around, my wife and I have joked around about, man, I just feel like I'm in the desert. And a lot of times it's because I've chosen to go in the desert and sometimes, God's teaching us something through that, but a lot of times it's because my own wandering off. So to answer your question, for me, I think it's starting the day. It's like, okay, what's most important? I'm going to start there. And so for me, it is getting in the word. I've gone through a bunch of phases of my life where it's this devotional, that devotional. Oswald Chambers has always been instrumental for me. However, when I'm in the word, it's different. When I'm going straight to the source, it's different. And then and the prayer side of things has been, I think, probably a continued work in progress as God's revealed to me in terms of what does that prayer life look like. I had somebody square me up one time. I said something about my grandma's a prayer warrior, and they said, we're all called to be prayer warriors. Like that's not, something unique there, which comes back to the discipline piece. But anyway, so starting there, anchoring my day, this is most important. And then it's, holding every thought captive under the obedience of Christ. And how specific can I go through my day that way? I've joked around with a couple other leaders that, because people talk about how do I bring my, my faith into work, and it's tough at a public institution or whatever else. I'd much rather work for somebody who is holding every thought captive under the obedience of Christ and how they deal with me and lead than somebody who's kicking off every meeting with a prayer or a Bible study or whatever else. Like, I think it's when we see living our faith out that way, number one, it's way more impactful. God, the Holy Spirit's working all the time, as opposed to, hey, let's talk about Jesus. Not to minimize that, but I think that's a big part of it. And then I think the last part of it for me is how I close my day matters a ton. And I think we do a good job, preparing the day, executing the day, but how do I review and make sense of what I just went through and make sure that I'm thankful and appreciative, make sure that I am, closing my day the same way I'm starting the day in terms of my anchor, so that I can rest up and go do it again the next day.
Boy, that's a great thought. We always think about the beginning, but we don't always think about the ending. Now, because you take the game of baseball, to only name your starter, not who your closer is, and not know you're in close, it's a big deal. That is a great thought. I've never thought of that before. That is really, really good.
And one other thing on that, Mike, too, like you bring up baseball, I think it's just so easy to move on to the next one, right? You play it because it's 162. Yep. It's every day. It's part of what makes this game special for a lot of us. Other sports, there's more of a preparation, go execute, do championship review, prepare for the next one. Where baseball, it's like, okay, we're on the next one tomorrow. And so it's like, how can I make sure that I am making sense of what I just went through, anchoring today, so that I can be prepared going into tomorrow?
That's really good. So you've got this faith that's driving you. You grow up in a faith family. You've got a mom and a dad who are living it. You're going to church. Where did you see yourself going with this love of baseball? Did you dream one day that there would be Major League Baseball cards and bobbleheads and all those things of Kyle Stark? What was going through your mind of where the game of baseball was headed for you?
Yeah, I joke with people. I said I grew up like most of us wanting to be a big leaguer. And unfortunately, I realized sooner than I wanted to that wasn't going to happen. Grew up playing the game, loved the game, obsessed with the game, but I knew I wanted to work in the game. And so it then became, okay, then I want to be a general manager. I want to lead an organization. I want to do it at the highest level. I had coached in college, loved coaching, but I wanted to be at the highest level. And this was, at a time frame where people that were working in the game were people that played the game at the highest levels. Yeah. And so I was fortunate to get an opportunity, again, coached in college, able to do some things in school, whatever else, but was able to get an opportunity with Cleveland. And Cleveland was had some vision in terms of being creative to bring people in from different walks of life and different arenas, and had a lot of talented people come through that front office and have continued to have talented people come through that office. So was able to get an opportunity there. But it's funny. I'll tell a quick story. People are like, got my lottery, got my MBA, and people are like, wow, you must, and you clear focus on what you want to do. You must be really smart. And I said, yeah, all of that. And I'm making $500 a month, whatever it was at a time as an intern. I don't know how smart I really am, but I had clear vision.
What I love about it, and I heard you telling Jason Romano, who's just one of the greatest guys out there, you were talking to Jason about it. And it wasn't like, well, Kyle graduates college with 1 million baseball connections and he's just picking up the phone. Which of the organizations would I like to work in? Because they're all knocking down my door. How did you get, this is a great story. How did you get that first job and that first breakthrough with Cleveland?
Yeah, it was old school. I wrote 30 GMs, old school letter, wrote 30 GMs. And I laugh, I think about, now what does that look like? But I wrote 30 general managers and got responses from a decent number, and actually had 2 reach out and actually call and want to have a conversation. Ironically, it's the 2 I ended up working for in terms of Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Cleveland was a better opportunity at the time. But yeah, it was try to put together a good resume that may impress somebody. Now I laugh. I think about my resume is pretty normal compared to what other people are. I mean, we got, nuclear physicists wanting to work in baseball, but it was try to do that, try to build some relationships, but then it was old school, write some letters and see if anybody wanted to call me back.
Isn't it funny how you look back and you're like, how naive was I? I wonder how many letters those men get, but yet there's something about that I bet those guys appreciated, that you reached out. What did you learn? I'd love to hear your thought on this. What did you learn about the 2 that you heard back from a couple organizations? What was it those guys said when they called you? Because it was probably more than your pedigree they were coming after. What did they say about receiving a letter from you that made them want to call you?
Yeah, I think I think it speaks volumes about how those guys saw their front offices in terms of, hey, we're looking for some different perspectives. We're looking for talented people. I don't care where they come from necessarily. And I think that, and they probably saw some intentionality and persistent work towards something where it lined up, and I think, again, Cleveland, but long before me, it had brought really smart, talented, way smarter than me people into their front office that went on to be GMs to get different perspectives. And Pittsburgh at the time, Dave Littlefield was a general manager. I'll never forget. We talked on Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. Extreme work ethic guy. Dave himself had coached, was a GA in college, had coached football and baseball. So I think there was probably some commonalities in terms of background and pedigree to be able to say, hey, I can identify and relate to this, and it's worth a conversation.
That's so good. So you're a college baseball coach, St. Bonaventure. You have a dream of getting a professional baseball. What was different about professional baseball getting in the inner workings than you ever dreamed it would be like? What did you not expect going into it that you found to be a reality?
Yeah, I think the two things that really jumped out, one is it is a big business. Like, you think about an organization, at the end, my time in Pittsburgh, we had over 150 staff within baseball operations, not to mention the business side. And they've only gotten bigger, like front offices and everything have only gotten bigger. So you start to realize just how vast this operates. It's a big corporation. Yep. When you're this is why a lot of college baseball coaches are like, I'm not leaving this game because I get to pick my players. I get to coach them. I got control over my program. That draw maybe isn't there. I think the second thing is that it is, and we're all people. And, I think you think, well, at the highest level, everything's going to be perfect. It's going to be the best people, the best everything. And you realize, no, it's a group of people, flawed people. Some are talented, some aren't, which people have probably said the same thing about me.
Yep.
And so you get a chance to really see at the end of the day, it is a game of people. It's a business of people and all of the stuff that comes with that.
And you really learn that in Pittsburgh because you go from the work that you did migrating through Cleveland's office to going to Pittsburgh as the assistant GM and really beginning to put your fingerprint on what had been a slide. I mean, they had been in a slide organizationally for years. Your group has brought in to turn that slide around, and not everybody bought in to Kyle's ideas on what we're going to do to change the slide. Talk to us a little bit about coming in, and you've got your folders with your ideas, and now you start implementing and they don't seem to be working fast enough. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I think so. A couple quick lessons early on in my time in Pittsburgh. The first one was I talked to some people way smarter than me to get their take as I went into the situation, and everybody said, take the first year to see what you got, assess what you got. Looking back, I'm not wired that way. But I think what I did do, and I think what aligned with it was, okay, as you're intentionally making clear, hey, these are the values we're going to, subscribe to. But I wasn't immediately going to start changing things, the way of operating, because sometimes you get into a spot where like, I'm fighting a fight over here on the way this thing's done. And you know what? There's a lot of ways to skin the cat. Like that's not worth it to me. But not bending on the values. What we were going to go in day one, because I wanted everybody to know who we were going to be, who we aspired to be, so I could find out who wanted to be a part of that.
Yep.
So that's one lesson. Two other ones, I'll never forget the number of people that said to me, we talk about an idea and they're like, well, that's not how we've done things here. And I'm like, 15 years of losing. I mean, it's the worst team in the big leagues. Like what? But what that crystallized for me is people are people like that. We're not logical, rational, people are people. And that is the business we're in as leaders. And I think a lot of times as leaders, we think it's something different. And it's like, so I got to meet people where they're at and navigate things differently. And then the third lesson that first year was I had a coach quit the first day of spring training. I had a coach quit the second month of the season. And I had a guy give me the book, Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And they said, if you do things the right way, you never have to fire anybody because they'll self-select out. And I joked, I said, well, I must be doing things excellent right now. But what it crystallized for me was, again, there's different, we can argue what's the best culture, the best style, or the best whatever else. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of ways you can be successful.
Yep.
And ultimately, it's having clarity on who you want to be, make sure everything's aligned around that, and then get the right people that want to do it that way. And that, people will say, well, we got to have different thoughts and different perspectives for sure. I want different experiences, different perspectives, but I don't have interest in different alignment of values. We've got to be aligned around, that identity. Who do we want to be? And so those were some lessons I think early on that really crystallized for me that, set some things in motion, especially for a 28-year-old farm director. Every coach was older than me and navigating some of that.
So here you come in with these new ideas, new ways of doing it. You've got values, you and the GM. Who in the organization was it important that they got the values? Was it just the people in the front office? Was it just coaches? Was it players? And how did you think about those values seeping out into the organization?
Yeah, I had a mentor hit me at one point, because here I am, farm director, overseeing whatever, 80 to 100 staff and 200 players, and I was going to reach everybody. And he reminded me, he said, hey, best leader in the history of the world, Jesus Christ, he focused on 12 and really focused on 3. And so it was a reminder for me that I couldn't do it. I mean, I tell people, I say, you can have success, short-term success doing it. But if you want anything to last or to really be able to, be stable, you've got to be able to replicate yourself and be able to work through other people. And so with that, then it was identifying, okay, who are the leaders of leaders? Who are the people that we're going to invest in and spend time with to be able to make sure that they're then extensions of us to be able to drive those things throughout. And then ultimately, as you think about that top-down perspective, it's then, okay, how do we get it going both ways? How do we get a top-down, but then a bottom-up that ultimately everybody involved has to take ownership of, okay, what does this value set mean to me? What does this mean to me? Where are there potential differences of opinion, different thoughts, whatever else, so that I can take ownership of it and then go bring it to life on a consistent basis?
If you could go back to that first 2 years, what would you do different? Looking back now, knowing what you know, knowing the outcome, what would you do different about those first 2 years?
I think so. The things we just talked about, I would have been intentional from day one, as opposed to realizing it over time.
Gotcha.
And then I think the other part of it, I'm a development guy. I'm the coach's heart. Like I think, and it can get me in trouble. Like, I think I can help everybody grow as a leader, or coach. Who matters a ton. And so the selection of especially people you're putting in a leadership position matters a ton. And, I don't think that we necessarily ever shortcut character, but maybe maturity and ability to lead. Probably took some chances on some really talented X's and O's, technical, tactical people that, maybe weren't necessarily as good at developing people. And there were some, there's some fallout to that.
Yeah, because it really, and I heard you say this to Jason, I thought it was so good. It really didn't matter our industry. We're all in the people business, right? I mean, we're all dealing with people. How did you as a leader grow getting better dealing with people? Because you're dealing with people organizationally in the front office. You're dealing with scouts. You're dealing with minor league managers. You're dealing with Major League Baseball players ultimately. How did you get better as a leader dealing with people?
So I'll share kind of 3 buckets that I think have been important as I think through that. So the first one was better understanding, Yeah, it's all different types, right? God's created all of us differently. And so part of that was through selection as we started to break down personality types and different things and what were the attributes we were looking for. I just started to become way more curious about some of those dimensions of people and what really matters, what doesn't, how do you find some alignment to move some of those things forward? And as simple as, and that starts with me first. Like,
Yep.
the simple breakdown is, are you more task oriented or more people oriented? I'm more task oriented. And so just being aware of that and understanding when I'm stressed, I'm going to double down on that. So what's the other side, the complementary side? So that was one big one. The second one was my wife. Heather is the exact opposite of me. Every personality assessment we take, she's the exact opposite. And she's shown a different side of God that if it was left to my own devices, wouldn't be good. I've joked with people talk about the topic of balance. And I don't believe there's such thing as balance. If you're going to achieve and accomplish, there's not balance. Like you're getting at, it's a fight for balance. But we're going to have a lot of eggs in one basket at certain times, but it's appreciating the other side of things. And she has done that for me tremendously. And part of it is she's my wife. Like I have to love her differently.
Yep.
So it has shown me a lot of that. And then the third one, and it's tied to her, is, I was reading a lot of different books and studying different things. And she told me, she said, you need to read this book. And I look at the book, it's light, it's baby blue, it's got balloons on it. It's called Love Does by Bob Goff. And I'm like, I'm not reading that. And she squared me up. She said, Kyle, you need to love people better than you. You don't love people the way you need to. And so I read that book, profound, different look at love. Reached out to Bob. We've had a few different conversations and just thinking about, okay, what does this look like in real life? Which then connects on the faith side of what's God call us to do, love him, love others. And if I'm not doing that as a leader, there's going to be a gap there. So those, to answer your question on how better dealing with people, those things really, changed my lens on that. People are messy, starting with me.
Yep.
And are we willing to, engage in it and meet people where they're at and try to help them, be who they want to be.
So you go in, and I've heard you talk about this, and I've read about it. One of the things you did was SEAL training. You brought it. That was important to you. You thought it would be good for the players. What was so important about them and that organization you wanted your organization to get? What were the things they brought to the table nobody else could bring?
Yeah. So I think, this has been at the time was a hot button topic.
Yeah.
You talk about really living through some spiritual warfare was a tough time, personally, professionally. But as we looked at it, first of all, and I tell people, I said, look, if people think we did SEAL training with our players, that's disrespectful to that community in terms of what they go through. But what it was a belief in, number one, excellence is excellence. I don't care what arena it is. And sometimes we need to get out of our comfort zone to realize what those principles are. So number one is it got us out of our comfort zone. Number two, they're one of the best, elite fighting forces in the world.
Yep.
And so for me to say I've got nothing to learn from them, like, I just think that's hugely arrogant. That doesn't make sense. And then the other part of it was, at the end of the day, they're trying to forge performance that won't break down under stress. They're trying to forge teams and relationships that won't break down under stress. And they're trying to forge leaders who will meet the demands of what's in front of them. I'm like, that's what we do. That's our job. And so it was less about, hey, this is going to fix anything or whatever else, but it was a way that they were going to be able to reinforce things we were doing, core values we had, and bring it to light in a different way than, and at the end of the day, for a lot of our guys, they thought it was really cool a couple of days. Did everybody like it? No. But that was really the thought process, behind it.
So you endure people not all understanding and people not all agreeing, and the organization begins to turn, and you guys go from being out of the playoffs to in the playoffs. When did you sit in your office, sit in the bleachers, you're at PNC, and you look down and you're like, okay, I think this might be working? When did it hit you that I think culture has really begun to shift, not only for our team, but even for the city? When did that strike you? Was there a point, a moment in time?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I think if every year I was more convicted in how we were doing things and that we were going to turn it around. There were a lot of tangible examples of growth and improvement along the way. It wasn't showing up. It's not the overnight success, right? And so it wasn't obvious to everybody outside. What I think going through, so it's funny timeline, and it's also cool just how God works, because like he's weaving a bunch of things together, and that part of the conversation is such a small part of the conversation. But we go into, so we hire Clint Hurdle after 2010, again, talking about alignment. Clint was aligned 100%, good friend of mine. And Clint has a unique skill set in that he is the biggest, loudest voice in the room and has no problems telling you he believes that where we're going. Like he's not bashful about it. And we needed that at the major league level. So 2011, we make significant progress. 2012, we make significant progress to the point where we're in the mix in August. And then we go out and have the worst September in the history of baseball. We just collapse. Well, that was the same time that we were doing some different training down in Florida. And so it became a huge, huge story. And there were some motivations for people to get people fired. What was cool was not everybody was on board. In fact, some of the frustrations were coming from inside. Big lesson learned for me was that my obsession was leading down, and I needed to do a better job of leading up, making sure everybody was aligned and understanding where we were going and why and everything else. Now, to the people I worked for as credit, they backed me and us, and we were able to weather that winter. And a big part of that winter was, I think what that did was it forced people to say, look, are you diving all in or not? And I'll never forget. So we did organizational meetings every year in January where we got everybody together because we just felt like we needed to spend time together in order to build relationships. And I'll never forget Clint Hurdle saying to the room, the 150 of us, he said, hey, everybody's got a decision maker. And he points at me, he says, are we going to have his back? Because I'm sure there's some people in here that are like, it's a little too hot. I don't know if I want to be too associated with that. And so I think, and it was less about having my back, but just organizationally, are we going to lock arms and sell out to this? That lined up with, we made some good decisions at offseason acquisitions, and it was a perfect storm of how some things came together. But if you look at the progress from 2010 to 11, 11 to 12, and then the big jump from 12 to 13, those things were happening. So long-winded way of saying, was there a specific time? No, but there were times along the way. And then looking back, there were some times where it was like, hey, I think that was a little bit of an inflection point.
Was it hard, Kyle, to do all that work to get it where you got it to? And in 2019, the organization says, hey, I think we're going to go a different direction. How did you handle that as a leader, both spiritually and as a guy, as a man, as a husband? What was that process like for you? Because I think everybody goes through it. We don't want to go through it, but we're going to go through it. Yeah. How did you weather that season?
So it's interesting. So I think one, you know what you're signing up for, right? I think it was Brian Billick, longtime NFL coach, said, look, you're getting fired. It's just a matter of whether it's for results or relationships, one of the two, because you either can't win enough or you can't please enough people at some point. And so 12 years in Pittsburgh was a long time. A lot of success, a lot of relationships, but you know what you're signing up for, number one. Number two, my wife and I, like 12 years in Pittsburgh is a long time. You talk about that alignment piece. We knew in our hearts that it was time for us to probably go do something else at some point. I got sucked into, I think, again, God, gives each of us different strengths and abilities. I think my sweet spot's probably going into a tough situation and wearing it and helping get us going in the right spot. But you develop relationships. My wife wanted me to love people. So the relationships and pouring into people and everything,
Yep.
It was like, and you talk yourself into, okay, something really substantial is built over time. And so, I think I've kind of, and where my boys were at, my oldest wanted to graduate from high school in Pittsburgh. There's just a few things,
Yep.
I think all forms that shifted our focus, but we knew that season of life was nearing an end point. And then I think the third part of it is what's your identity wrapped up in. And I'm not going to say that, you don't get checked when somebody says thanks, but no thanks. And the flip side is it's easy for me to say, well, it's a matter of time. Everybody's going to get fired. Well, no, there's some things I could have done differently in terms of, navigating some things. However, I think that identity piece that I've always believed, but it really came into, am I defined by what I do? And if I am, then that's going to hit hard. But I got a text from the new president as I was flying back from the GM meetings. Had just been out representing the organization, and he said, "Are you going to be in the office tomorrow?" And I said, I wasn't planning on it. I was planning on coming up next week, but I can. He said, yeah, I'd like you to come up. And so I joked with my wife and my youngest that morning. I said, okay, I'm off to go get fired. I'll be back for dinner. And that's what happened.
Well, it was funny when I was interviewing Clint, I didn't know Clint at the time at all. I'd never met him till our interview. Now, of course, he's in the Bible study, and I've gotten to know he's the loudest person in the room. I have learned that. And I was interviewing him, and I said, so when you got out of baseball, he said, so you mean when I got fired?
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't going to say it quite like that. He's like, well, that's what's in the paper. That's what happened. So
no, it is. Clint and I have, and I've joked with some other people because, like, even I say, when I got fired in Pittsburgh, and they're like, "Oh, don't say that you didn't get fired." I said, "No, I did. In fact, they liked me so much they asked me that they paid me 2 years to not work for them." So that's what happened.
that's part of it. What did you learn, Kyle, during that season of I am this, now I'm recreating who Kyle is professionally, right? Who you are. What did you learn about that season? What did you learn during that season you couldn't have learned any other way through that adversity and that the perceived, quote unquote, perceived failure, because it's not, because of all the learnings that come from it. What would you say?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think one, everything that we know and learn, I think God's constantly refining at a deeper level. So I say, hey, I tell people all the time, my identity is not wrapped up in what I do. It's wrapped up in who I am. And God's like, really? At what level? Let's really test this and refine this. And ultimately, it ain't even, who I am, it's whose I am. That's so right. I think that deeper, refinement of going through something and bringing some of that to life. I think the other part of it, Mike, is there's an element of, when you're advancing in your career and humble and hungry and trying to grow and whatever else, we're human beings, and it's easy for us to get complacent to some extent. And it's not even so much I got complacent in my job, but when you now are in a spot where it's like, okay, what are you going to do with yourself now? And you're used to certain standards of living, you're used to certain expectations, certain responsibilities, certain all of those things. And now you've got to hustle to recreate or do different or whatever else. And what matters most to you, because what matters most to me now probably isn't the same as what it was 10, 12, 15 years ago. And what does that look like? And so it was really cool in that happens in the fall of 19. My wife says, can you give me 6 months? She said, I'd ask for a year. I know you won't give me a year. Can you give me 6 months? Because I've been on the road 20, 25 days a month for 12 years. And I said, sure. And then God says, no, I want more than that. COVID happens. The world shuts down. And we were able to do some things as a couple and as a family that we never would have. And it's reframed some things for me in terms of what matters most and where I want to be. The heat and spotlight and the grind and everything of professional baseball, right group of people in, but just to be in it, no thanks. There's other ways that I can impact people and scratch the baseball itch and whatever else.
So now you are in that season of you've got your coaching company, and we'll have links to all the stuff in the show notes. When you go in and work with a leader picks up the phone, an organization picks up the phone, and they call Kyle, and you show up on the scene to coach them, to lead them, to meet with them, maybe in their time of adversity, is usually when people call, not when times are good, but when times are bad. At the end of the day, what do you want them to remember most about Kyle Stark? What's the part of you want to leave with every organization and every leader and every person you meet with?
I think two things. I think one, well, actually, you know what? It comes back to the questions we used to always ask that players would ask themselves as they evaluated a coach. You know, does this person care about me? Can I trust them? And can they help me get better? And so I boil it down to two things in terms of that they feel, hey, I'm invested in their success. This isn't about me. This isn't about my path. This is about trying to help them, you know, achieve and be successful. And then the second part of it is that they walked away going, you know what, I'm better. I got challenged. You know, again, I shared, I think God gifts us all differently. I think I have the ability to challenge people in such a way that is received as opposed to that it crushes them. And so hopefully they walk away, you know what, man, I got squared up and challenged here, but I kind of like it. I'm excited. I feel better about where we're going and the growth that we're having, like where that going through that journey is something that's actually exciting and rewarding as opposed to a burden or a grind.
You talked a lot at the beginning about your dad, and he was such a great picture of who Jesus was and what Jesus looked like. What do you want your kids to say about you one day? They're sitting on a podcast with some Yahoo in Atlanta, and he's asking them questions about their dad. Hey, I knew your dad. Tell me about your dad. What do you want them and your precious wife to say about you?
Yeah, I think in a perfect world, they're saying that same thing, that he showed us Jesus, you know, and again, I think, you know, in our own way. And, but I think, but to unpack, okay, what does that look like? It is that that they're deeply loved, that they understand, you know, that there is a true north, and we're going to commit to that. We're going to commit to truth. We're not going to bend on truth no matter what. And then at the end of the day, as much as he loves me and accepts me, he wants the best out of me. That there is a pursuit of excellence here, not in terms of needing to do it in order for my own self-worth or from an earning standpoint, but from a honoring the talents and gifts that God's given me, you know, is ultimately the perspective there.